Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to HomeGames. This is the 30th HomeGames, believe it or not. You probably would believe it because the last one that we put on YouTube was HomeGames 29, and the nature of the consecutive kind of frame of numbers means it was always always a safe bet that this was going to be number 30. It is lovely to be back in the seat, which has been kept so warm, so well by Mr. Nelson, who I see lurking on the chat there, ready to chuck rocks. I'd let it be known that whenever Steve's doing it, I just step back, right? I just relax. I don't get in the way and try and make funnies. I just behave myself. We'll see if Steve is able to do that today. Much more importantly than any of that, though, we are joined by Mr. Garry Hale of HK Wealth Managers in the fine city of Stirling. Garry, how are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you, Mark, and thank you for having me on the show. Is it a show? I don't know. Is it?
I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is.
I feel like I'm in a chat show of some sort.
Yeah, I think it's best described in the category of 45 minutes of dicking about. I think that's probably what we're doing here. And why does it say HomeGames 28 then, says Andy Schleider? Because of how we did it in a different way. It's the 28th, actually. It's because it's the 28th of October, Schleider. Yeah, it's the date, man. It's the date. What's the matter with you? Paraplans, honestly. Anyway, we've got loads to talk about. Garry, as many of you will know, is a man of wealth and taste and long experience, but with only slight badgerish stripes on his beard to indicate the length of that experience, and looks like he would rather be sailing today. Decent day out on the waters out there, Garry?
I haven't been out the door today, so I couldn't tell you. I haven't even welcome to working from home, eh?
That's the way it goes. That's the way it goes. But we'll get into all that in a second. Let's do just our usual tiny bits of housekeeping. First of all, an apology from me. Actually, two apologies from me. I can't speak properly, and no, we know that, and all that kind of stuff. I burnt my tongue the other day on a very agreeable casserole, and it hurts like a bastard. And so I'm talking a little bit like, I don't know, Billy Idol or Chris Isaak or something at the moment out the corner of my mouth. So I apologise for that.
Was that, Mark, when you were away on your week away on your tropical island with your inner circle? Is that when that happened, was it?
That's amazing. Who ever thought that Kim Kardashian West could be out of touch with the common people? A remarkable state of affairs. And those of you that don't look at our Twitter feeds will have no idea what any of that was about, nor about the pumpkin carving that we're probably going to spend a little bit of time talking about as well, Mr. Hale, and the incorrect nature of that. Yeah, Neil, do you know what? There's no point, and especially anyone that knows me, it's likely to be profane, and there's no way around it. My second apology is that we've basically run out of t-shirts, right? I can't do a t-shirt of the week anymore, so I'm reduced to doubling up. I basically had to kick one of the kids out of their bedrooms to make space for all the ones that I've bought. We've, number 30 of these, and I just can't buy anymore. So I may continue wearing offensive t-shirts, I may not, but they won't be new every time. This one I'm not sure I've done before, but this was a gig we went to in Camden with Mike Barrett a couple of years ago, The Prophets of Rage. I was ridiculous. I've always said that gigs in London are really boring, and you've got to come north to get a decent crowd, something you'd probably agree with, Garry. I would say, and the further north you go, the better the crowds go at gigs. But this was crazy. It was absolutely nuts, and highly enjoyable. If you are having any audio or visual problems with seeing us or any of that stuff, click the wee link that's in the chat, and it will just about every time sort your problems out. And my one extra little thing is, if you are enjoying what we're doing or anything like that and feel moved to repay us over and above any of the stuff you might have done for us in previous weeks, it's that point in a quarter where we collect opinions on how your platforms are doing. We do this once a quarter. I know other people do too, but ours is the best one. So would you click the little rate your platforms button down there? It only takes a couple of minutes, and tell us things. Giggling with Mike Barrett. I've literally never ever giggled. I've laughed at Mike Barrett a few times, but I don't recall ever giggling with him. So that's that. Right, enough nonsense. Let's get into it. Garry, tell us a little bit about getting going. We were saying just before, as a Stirling boy, there's one place where you always start your career if you're going into financial services in Stirling. I bet a few people in the chat can guess where that is, but tell us how you got going.
Yeah, okay. So as you alluded to, started the career with the mighty Scottish Amicable. It was, as of last month, it was 30 years ago that I entered this great industry / profession, depending on how I suppose at that time it was certainly the industry because it was working for a big product provider. So yeah, as of September last year, I started that journey 30 years ago at the young age of 17. And if you look back my Twitter feed, you'll see the little ID card that I got when I entered the industry back then. So worked in various pensions. I won't go through the nitty gritties of it, but worked in various pensions departments for a few years. Scott Am at the time were restructuring their sales support centres, and a new sales support centre opened up within the head office at Craigforth, and I quite liked the look of a salesy sort of job, so I joined in there, did that for a little while, and then still quite early on, I got the opportunity to become what was called a broker consultant, a sales consultant, and an inspector with Scott Am, and moved through to our Edinburgh office, which was, that was a really exciting thing to do, because now you're getting into briefcases and company cars and things like that. So,
Did you have a big phone? Did you have a big phone?
Well, did I have I'm not even sure I had a phone to start with. I got a phone early on, but I'm not even sure when I first did it. I had a phone, but yeah, certainly early on in that journey, I got a phone with a little bit that you pulled up, a little aerial that you pulled up, so you could. I've actually still got it. I've got all my old phones, all my old Nokias. I must admit, strange thing to do, I know, but so yeah, I got the opportunity to join sales, broker consultant. At one time, I was the youngest broker consultant with Scott Am. I was the ripe age of 21, 22 at the time, and I was out sort of plodding the streets of Edinburgh, calling on financial advisors. So that was a great insight into the. I'm not sure it was a profession then either, but the financial advisor community, and seeing all the good, the bad, and the ugly that was going on, and goes on within that side of things. So that was about 7 years, and then 2001 left Scott Am, which at that point it had become Pru. Pru had taken over by that point, so left 2001, set up HK Wealth 2001, 2002, started trading in 2002 as HK Wealth, and back then started trading as probably quite a forward-thinking business, a fee-based cash flow planning, cash flow modelling business, which I think 18 years ago was it's kind of the norm nowadays, but it was quite advanced or forward-thinking then. So definitely cash flow planning is at the heart of the business and the work that I do, and that goes obviously way back, and thanks to people like Paul Etheridge in the early days of cash flow planning, so that's a bit of background. And
and what got you onto that? Because that's a big step, right? Go from an inspector to running a kind of new model type firm, Etheridge style firm. Then had you been calling on firms that were doing it that way before that?
Yeah, it's a good point. So I first saw Presswood software. People know it perhaps more as Truth software nowadays. Presswood Truth. Way back as a broker consultant in Edinburgh, there was an IFA called Peter Griffiths Buchanan who worked in Edinburgh, and he was using cash flow planning software as a big follower of Paul Etheridge. And it was back then, it was still in a DOS computer system, so it was black screen with bright green lettering, and he sort of spoke highly of the benefits of it. And so back then, prior to starting the business, that's when I kind of first got introduced to it, and I saw the advantages of it and saw that looked like a forward way of sort of developing the business. And I think it's just part of going out and calling on advisors. You see some of the good stuff going on, and some of the stuff that if you're going to develop a business from scratch, it literally, going back to then, it was literally a blank sheet of paper. There was no, coming from a broker consultant, there was no Yeah, I know I'm showing my age with MS-DOS, but I did say I started it 30 years ago. But
How proper computers worked.
yeah, proper computers. Yeah, they worked. The sound and everything. Oh, they wouldn't have had sound back then, probably actually.
BBC Micro.
Yeah. What was I saying?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows the cash flow planning and seeing the DOS system for the first time, and but yeah. So going back to why I introduced the cash flow planning, I just saw that as a really forward way to be developing a business and having something different that perhaps wasn't the sort of the main thing that was going on at the time. It wasn't just about selling products. And yeah, the point I was making was when you're calling on advisors, you see some of the good things going on, and you see some of the things if you're developing a business from scratch that you wouldn't want sort of in your own business. And as I say, that's the beauty of starting, with a blank sheet of paper and starting afresh with no baggage or no history, I suppose. So
yeah. And was it just you at the time? I mean, you literally kind of empty office and then you walk.
So the business was started. There was me and a co-director who retired out of the business. It's almost 10 years ago. I think it's 8 or 9 years ago. He was edging the end of his career at Scott Am. It was a sort of a long-term sort of family friend, and so the two of us entered it together. And then it's about 8 or 9 years ago he left the business, and I continued on as I am today, sort of thing. So and we're doing all right.
Doing all right, yeah. Well, here you are. 18 years is you can't sniff at that. Whatever's going on, and we'll talk a little bit about how the journey's gone. But there's gonna be questions from Ian about, you said you saw some of the good stuff. What was some of the things that you felt you wanted to avoid?
Yeah, I think the main thing was it. Yeah, I mean, I'm maybe being unkind when I'm saying the bad, but it was more just moving away from the sort of product sales side of things. I think it was typical, advisors, were just selling stuff, and acceptable. That doesn't mean that it was bad. It just it was having a proposition that was more around planning for clients rather than just the sale of the product. So that was probably, it's not an example of, it doesn't mean bad stuff was going on, but it's an example of how I just wanted to develop a different structure to the business.
And in terms of kind of getting clients through the door, did you attract people by saying, listen, we'll look at the future cash flow of your life and when you can afford to retire and that kind of stuff? Was that the way you got the good folk of Stirling to darken your door?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. So back then, maybe unlike nowadays, albeit there's still some way to go, financial planning, as we currently refer to it, and cash flow planning wasn't really, we're now getting used to it here within the profession now. Obviously, outside the profession, people don't even maybe fully understand it nowadays, and certainly didn't back then. So it was really just, it was part of the proposition. So it was part of it wasn't this is, and this, I guess this goes back to the sort of Paul Etheridge ways of doing it. It wasn't this is a specific thing we're going to bolt on to, selling investments. It was just part of the service and the proposition. And it wasn't, you didn't make a big play on the fact that you were offering financial planning. It was just part of what you did. And I think that's what I quite liked about it. It was just part of the process, I suppose. You go through that. But, there's no hiding. It wasn't an easy thing, you're coming out with something new like that. And it was unheard of. Well, not unheard of. It was pretty new then, so it wasn't an easy thing to necessarily get across to people. So yeah, you just had to keep at it.
And one of the things that struck me about some of the people that have come to it later on is they've maybe started doing the cash flow stuff and more of a financial planning type thing in the last 5 years or whatever it might be, 5 or 6 years. So a lot of those plans haven't really had time to play out. Do you know what I mean? 5 or 6 years in the lifetime of a client is not all that much, I guess, unless you pick them up just before retirement, maybe. But with 18 years, you must have some clients. So I hope you've got some clients that have stayed with you, for if not for all that time, for most of that time. And so you've really had a chance to see how planning works in the longer term. And how do people react when they were 10, 15 years into this thing? Does it remain as relevant for them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I know there is some discussion around, some people say, financial or the cash flow planning side of financial planning is because, there's wider aspects to financial planning than cash flow modeling. But I know some people sort of say, cash flow planning is not sort of relevant to my clients or it's not appropriate or whatever. But I think because I just do it and it's just part of what I do and part of the service that I give to people, they just kind of now think that's just the norm. That's part of the, and when they come in for their planning meetings or review meetings, forward planning meetings, whatever you want to call them, we spend a fair chunk of the time looking at, pictures on the screen rather than bits of paper or, and certainly with Presswood, it's blue and red lines, blue is good, red is bad. And, some of and that's just part of what I do. So that, and actually, I mean, a big part of, I think, planning and work that advisors do, particularly perhaps for clients, a lot of the clients I deal with are retired, in retirement, onwards, and they're becoming more mature in their years. And so a big part of it is actually feeling reassured that everything's, this kind of am I going to be okay type thing. And cash flow planning can help massively with that. And I know for a lot of them coming in and just seeing, whether it be each year or every 6 months, that they're going to be okay and things, then that's massively reassuring to people. And plus, to be honest, as you say, some people going back as long as 18 years, I suppose they kind of almost become friends, and they actually look forward to catching up and having a call. This is arguably what's difficult about what we're going through just now. Yeah. This sort of face-to-face interaction and catching up and having a coffee and just, how the children, how the grandchildren now for a lot of them and all that, that's a part of the discussions, because arguably, well, not arguably, but they all feed into the financial plan as well, the different generations nowadays. So, even now having, it's, well, for me at the moment, it's Zoom calls with the clients. A good chunk of that at the beginning is actually just catching up with them and how they are. And that's great, and I think things like that refer back to the old adage of dealing with people that you like and you want to deal with, So pretty much I've probably got very few, if any, clients that I don't particularly like sort of dealing with. They tend to be people that well, I assume they like me, but like me and I like them, So, and I look forward to most of the meetings I have with them, I must admit, and that, that makes for a good, decent business, I think, as well,
Have you been like completely remote meeting over the last? I mean, obviously everybody was for a while, but have you done any face-to-face stuff of late?
Not since March. I've been in my office once since March, and that was just to pick up a parcel that had been delivered. So I have literally been. I'm pretty much a robo advisor. I think is that pretty much virtual now. And I'm as much as I'm a bit of an introvert, I'm actually missing. No, it's hard to believe, hiding behind a computer screen. I'm actually missing that interaction with people, I must admit, and just getting out from my home office. And but I worked a lot from home anyway, so I've got an office in Stirling, but I predominantly only use that for client meetings. So I did a lot of work from home and would go into the office to have meetings. So I'm quite comfortable working from home, but I'm missing that getting out and physically sort of meeting people. I suppose there's lots of things we're all missing, I guess, at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, if you're as misanthropic as I am, and being in the bunker here is actually brilliant. I hardly have to meet anybody. It's magnificent. I've been socially isolating for about 46 years. So all works fine for me. There's two big areas I think we want to hit on the rest of our time. One of which is you described it when you set up HK, and I presume Kay was your business partner at the time, and you were
nothing to do with Hong Kong. It was Hale and Kelly. I know it sounds like a comedy sketch. That's why we didn't go down that. That's why we didn't go down that route. Hence HK. Yeah.
Well, quite. I had this kind of Hong Kong footy thing in my head. Do you remember Hong Kong footy?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
#1 super guy. I tried to interest the kids in watching reruns of Hong Kong footy that weren't up for it. Anyway, that's not important right now. What is important right now is you said that was we were talking before that you set up on a kind of fee basis at an early stage, rather than ripping commission out when it was available and all that kind of stuff. And Phil, hello Phil, Phil Newton has asked a question up at the top of the chat, which I thought I might put to you. He's from Sandringham, quite a big firm, 180 IFAs, as he says there, and starting to see a move away from percentage-based fees, which I guess are a kind of very natural way for the industry to keep moving, because that's how commission worked and all that kind of stuff. He's asking about other fee charging models, I'll paraphrase, and how clients react to the presentation of fees in that different kind of way. And I guess you've probably been at this longer than most. So what's your experience of fee charging like?
Yeah, I mean, so going back 18 years ago, to sort of put yourself out as a fee-based advisor was, you were differentiating yourself, and actually that's what we kind of played on, was the fact that it was different, and it was more transparent, and it was, we played on all the positives of it, and a lot of that came from the sort of work that Paul Etheridge had done around. He had already been doing it for 20 years prior to that, so he had already laid the road. So we just, why, as much as it was innovative back then, he had already invented the wheel. So we were just sort of going with a process that was already quite well established. So, we set it up with, and it still is today, a sort of hybrid of fixed, monthly retainer fixed fees plus percentage fees. And, even today, that's still different. Not all advisors are doing that. And
No,
I've just stuck with it. And it, for me, and very small business, but it kind of works. I don't know if that was a question or not you asked me, but
no, it's good, because I think there's a very small percentage of firms actually doing that kind of retainer fee element. There might be plenty on here. I think we get quite a kind of progressive bunch in the chat, apart from some of you I'm thinking about aren't that progressive. But I think the total kind of proportion of advisors doing that kind of stuff is relatively low. So in the big State of the Nation thing that we were all haranguing you to answer recently, straight up fee charging on an ongoing basis, so not percentage based, is vanishingly small, right? It's really, really low, and it isn't growing all that fast, to be honest. But there are some people doing a hybrid thing, but it's less. Steve might counteract this or whatever in the chat, but I think it's well under a third of firms that we look at, which in themselves are a self-selecting bunch. So how does that work? Because I guess the problem with the subscription thing is it's all cool while you're in first flush and all that stuff, and then the direct debit drops out in month 7 or month 48 or whatever, and you're like, God, am I still paying that? Yeah, I mean, it's kind of your gym membership type problem.
Yeah, to be honest, I like that aspect of it. And what the funny thing is, because we charge a fairly modest monthly fee, the clients are by far paying the greatest amount of money in the percentage fees, which is obviously now far more transparent than it's ever been, and they get it now rammed in their face on a very regular basis. It's never both from the providers and from the advisors. So. And yet the fee they tend to remember, as you say, is the monthly standing order. And in a way, it's quite good, because it makes you, as an advisor or planner, really quite accountable for the work that you're doing. It's not something that, and it's arguably, maybe for some advisors a good thing, but for many a bad thing, is that the percentage fee often kind of gets forgotten about, no matter how many times the client gets it put in front of them, because I suspect the bulk of the literature, that they receive, they're not always reading the full details anyway. So I actually think that the accountability is really good, as you say, when the bank statement comes through, or online banking now, when they're checking through their statement, they see that amount. As an advisor, as a planner, it definitely makes you very accountable, and it generally is the thing that perhaps gets mentioned more than the percentage fees, to be honest, which, as I say, is often the largest part of it. So I think to be accountable is a good thing.
That's a huge statement in itself, right? Because I think the idea that many firms have been coached into wanting is kind of passive income, that you don't really have to work for. It just goes up. We call it lazy upside. and just builds over time, and it makes your business worth lots of money to sell and all that kind of stuff. But what you're talking about is a much harder road, where you need to, you're really putting it out front and center, not because regulation says you have to, but because you want to be held to account, and that's a big thing to do,
Yeah.
And I don't know how many firms are up for that challenge. One of the things that I've wondered sometimes in the industry is not particularly planners, actually, because you're very close to the client, so that relationship's there. But see, if you're the platform or the fund manager or whatever else, there shouldn't be any automatic rollover from one year to another. You should have to repitch almost and say, I've done this for you this year, and I'm going to do this for you next year. I'm worth my salt, And I guess that's what assessment of value statements are meant to do for the fund sector. I don't know, have you come across any of those yet?
No.
No. Again, we asked that in the thing, and most people are like,
So to be honest, I was reading the chat and I was getting distracted from your talk about Andy.
I stopped reading a long time ago.
Yeah, Andy Arthur's asking there, do you have a typical client the service is aimed at? So the vast majority of the clients I deal with, probably 80+%, are sort of retired or retiring. That's the bulk of the work that I do, is generally retiring clients or retired.
And I think
a lot of advisors are doing nowadays,
Yeah, and I think John asked, are the fixed subs coming from bank accounts? I think you can answer that. It is a standing order. I was chatting to other well-known fee-based planner, Mr. Alan Smith, the other day, not as part of this, but on matters unrelated. And he was saying that for him, the sub model allows him to advise people that maybe aren't asset rich. So people whose assets are tied up in different things, or the money's coming at another point, or whatever else. Entrepreneurs maybe building up a firm, or whatever it might be, and he kind of loves that, because it doesn't matter where the wealth is. That I can't take a percentage on it. I know I can get paid and I can work with these people, which is really nice.
And I think that's just, I know it's probably part of the discussion, albeit with it's just part of being a profession. I think, we kind of joked about it a couple of times, and, are we an industry, are we a profession? But I think if you have a service and you're giving good advice or good planning advice, and, if you can charge it by fees, then that's just part of being a profession. It shouldn't or doesn't always have to be tied in back to whatever assets clients have got and where they're held. So
dead on. Well, I'm glad you brought up the profession stuff, because with the rest of our time, the second big topic that I wanted to talk about with you is your kind of place in the profession. And you were past president of the PFS, which I'm sure many people know, and you are still on, it's the practitioner panel, do we call it now? Is that right?
Yeah, it just rolls off the tongue. It's the Personal Finance Society Financial Planning Practitioners Panel.
Say that 5 times quick while pitched. It will be hard.
We just call it PFS Power, because the kind of branding around it is PFS Power. So it's kind of like a bunch of superheroes, basically. That's.
Is that what you are?
Yeah, pretty much.
Brilliant. But you were president of the PFS at a really important time, right? In 2012, and that was when a lot of the RDR changes and PS 13.1 and lots of other bits were coming through, and driving. This is what I want to argue about: driving big change in the profession, and we'll call it a profession just to keep everyone happy. What was it like being president in such a tumultuous year?
Yeah, it was an interesting period to be the president. Every president in their year of presidency has a theme. They choose a theme and they work through that. Mine, I think, was pretty much getting us through RDR, because I guess for the whole industry and profession, it was a challenging time, and it was this kind of, is this going to be a cliff edge situation? Because a lot of the talk at the time was around, is there going to be a mass exodus of advisors as a result of this? Are lots of advisors not going to get qualified, not going to manage to meet the new criteria around sort of fees and charging, and changing their business structures. Some of them, a lot of people still had to get a lot of extra qualifications to meet the minimum used level. Well, it's still a level 4, as it still is today. And so definitely, the biggest part of the PFS's role at that time was around the concern about, a real diminishing advisor community. And, obviously PFS being part of the CII group, it has a duty to consumers. And, that was, our biggest concern. So it was getting, and, this is where the interaction, I suppose, with the PFS and the CII is that, it was, a lot of that was around exams. And to be honest, looking back on it now, or even just after the organization, the PFS as an organization actually kind of thrived off the back of RDR on the basis that initially we thought it was going to be a potential big problem, and that we're going to lose lots of members and we're going to lose lots of advisors. But actually, the need for extra qualifications, obviously meant the CII thrived, but that, interlinked with the PFS as an organisation thriving in terms of, supporting advisors in that process and lots of CPD work. And then there was, of course, the introduction of the SPSs. So it was making sure all the advisors, had their SPSs, and then ongoing, making sure all the correct CPD was done around achieving the SPSs. So, even since RDR, a lot of the work, the attendees at our regional events just absolutely soared off the back of RDR. They were booking out, and car parks were full at venues, and it was, it's just so yeah, from what could have been potentially a pretty disastrous, but I can, I remember sitting in some of the board meetings at the time, and a few people were very pessimistic about what it might look like. But I was always the advisor community, and it still is today. I mean, even since RDR, we've been through tons of stuff. That's me being polite. It's a really resilient community. I think it always has been, and I think, to be honest, it probably always will be. We just seem to be able to deal with stuff. We're dealing with stuff at the moment, to do with PI and FSCS levies and things like that, and things that get thrown at us that are often not welcome. But we just seem to, I just think it's a resilient bunch of people, a resilient profession, and we deal with stuff. So yeah, what could have been a bad time, we got through it, and yeah, it was an interesting time to be involved within the PFS.
I can imagine, and the one of the things I've been, I don't know why particularly, but I've been thinking a bit about recently, back to RDR and all that kind of stuff, and it strikes me that we all thought it was momentous change, and I wasn't an advisor by then. I was only ever a tied advisor anyway, but I was a guy, running a very, very small business when that came in. But before that, I'd been marketing products and designing products that I was trying to sell to advisors, generally unsuccessfully. And this was meant to be such a momentous thing, and it did feel that way at the time. But you said it really well there, as I knew you would, which is that a lot of it was administrative. I'm sure there are some ex-advisors out there that couldn't get an SPS, if they spend their lives at it, and good riddance to those guys, right? It's fine. We don't miss them. And double glazing has gained some new salespeople, and that's fine. But for most decent advisors doing a decent job, there was some gap fill. The gap fill was big, obviously, at the time, and SPSs and all that. Do you think then, with the benefit of hindsight, was RDR just admin? Did it really achieve very much?
I think so. I think it's been a bit of a springboard to other things, I would say, in a way. So, the moving of a load of advisors to level 4, that just dealt with an element of or one part of the advisor community at that time, because I can't remember the percentages. I knew them at the time, but we're going back 8 years now. I barely remember what I had for my lunch last week. Never mind what I did 8 years ago. But
casserole was very hot.
Yeah, a big chunk of the advisor community were already at level 4, and actually a big chunk of the advisor community were already way beyond that, and already at, say, level 6 and chartered and CFPs and things like that. So, and I think since RDR, that's only, that has become better and better. More and more advisors are striving towards chartered status or CFP status. They're also developing really good businesses way beyond just the bare minimums that are required. And I don't think RDR was necessarily the exact, but a lot of these things I think it might have been a bit of a springboard, as a bit of a kick up the backside. Get better fee, more transparency and clarity to the consumer, get fee structures in place, sort out your qualifications. And I think, this whole debate, are we a profession, are we not a profession? I think what we're seeing is the fact that people are off their own back. So, the regulator's not coming along at the moment and saying you have to be level 6, but loads and loads of people are doing that anyway off their own back because they think that's the right thing to do, which, it is. And they're building, I think, even beyond the bare minimums of professionalism, is they're building really good quality businesses, and they're doing loads of really good stuff around, things like well-being and diversity. And, we're hearing of recently, the guys doing, B Corp and, loads of really interesting things with their businesses that are just, I think it is all linked to professionalism, but it's just all, I don't know if that was the question you asked or not, Mark, but that was the answer.
I don't know. It was some time ago. So I've no idea. But thinking back to some of the early RDR stuff, and I love going back to that first speech from Callum McCarthy at Gleneagles, which was in 2006.
Yeah.
And I remember sticking that on slides and all that kind of stuff I've done at Gleneagles, so we could see that he was, really being mindful of how the FSA at the time was spending people's money.
Spend the money. Yeah.
That's right. Well, we wouldn't want him not to have a nice lunch, so that's all good. But part of what drove that initial kind of focus on the outcomes, not just for consumers in terms of churn and commission and stuff, but in terms of advisor firms themselves, was that the industry, if it was an industry at that time rather than a profession, was loss making. Taken as a whole, it lost money every year, and that didn't seem very good. And so a lot of the businesses weren't strong. So would you contend then that in the last 8-10 years of going through it and then kind of remaking the sector, do you think the advisory sector is stronger from a business point of view as a result? So we're doing cool things, and I get that with thinking about well-being and all that kind of stuff. But from a sustainable, solid business point of view, do you think it's forced firms to be more businesses, as opposed to commission-generating machines?
I think so. I think so. I mean, I think so. I don't know the full answer to that, if I'm honest.
No, I don't think anybody.
Yeah,
anybody does.
People might have views in the chat, but yeah, I think so. I mean, I suppose perhaps questionable some of the bigger organisations. There's a lot of discussion around how profitable they are, and but yeah, I think as far as I'm aware, the small and medium-sized, I think a lot of them are, they're running good quality, professional, profitable businesses as far as I'm aware. But
yeah, I mean, it seems that way from where we are, and one of the things.
An interesting fact: I googled RDR before coming on the call, and what comes up when you Google RDR is Red Dead Redemption, which is something to do with gaming. Those gamers amongst us. So that's the first so many 10 things that come up. Nothing to do with the retail distribution review. So.
Yeah, absolutely. It made it a bugger for search engine optimization. That's for sure. We had a really interesting question in from John Rowland, who many of you may remember did a fantastic session, HomeGames session, X months ago. I can't remember how long it was ago, John. But thank you for your question, and I've got it here. So I'm going to read it out, right? Because John's a master wordsmith, and he says it better than I ever can. So RDR, the asset management market study, the platform market study, they all this regulation, the successive waves of regulation that you've had to work through and all your peers have had to work through, they diagnose problems in the market. They don't fix problems in the market. So we tend to think of regulation fixing things, but actually what it's doing is flagging up the problems. And John asks, well, first of all, he says in the RDR may have created new problems. But what's your view in the kind of unfinished business as someone that's kind of been at the top of the profession and still involved in PFS Power and all the rest of it? Where should the regulator be looking next? What would you want them to diagnose in the months and years that are coming up?
Yeah, I mean, good question, as you say. I think, after I got beyond the Red Dead Redemption stuff on the internet about RDR, having refreshed my memory about what RDR was actually all about. So there seemed to be three things so one of them was making the retail investment market work better for consumers. That was one of the components. The other was about raising the minimum qualifications. And the third was about improving transparency of charges. I don't think we've dealt with the first bit of it, which is making retail investment markets work better for consumers. I think that's I'm not sure I even know fully what it means, but I'm not. But and maybe that's part of the problem. But I think that's the bit that we've still got work to do on. I think as we just touched on, I think the transparency and fee charging and better qualifications, and the fact that lots of businesses are doing that off their own back now, way beyond what the minimum standards now are. I think it is this other bit about making things work better for the end consumer, and there's probably lots of components within that. Whether that's funds and fund managers and fees around that, whether that's the platform market and again perhaps the fees around that, and perhaps it's captures advisor fees as well in there. Although we now have to disclose them, and it's perhaps capturing are all these things right and good value for the end consumer. I think that's what it's probably trying to get at, and I think that's probably where there's more work to be done over the coming years, I suspect.
Yeah, it kind of sounds right. It is, I think, proved, not we've done it, but lots of other people have done it as well. It's proved that this game of investing in the long term has got more expensive since RDR. And maybe the pendulum needed to swing up here a little bit because it was being propped up by balance sheets from life cos in ways that we don't even want to think about. But it now probably needs to. Something needs to happen there. We're coming towards the end of our time, and we've got loads of questions starting to come in. So I'm going to fire a few at you, if that's all right. That you've probably read them already. First of all, there's a guy on here called Thomas McPhail. Now, what I'm wondering is that the actual Tom McPhail, also previous HomeGames resident and now scooter salesman, or is it somebody just pretending? That's what I want to know, but I can't prove it. But first of all, Mr. Rafferty from Origo, hey Ant, how you doing? So he was thinking about you and many firms working from home. Do you still see your firm as in the long term being regional, as serving the good folk of Stirling, or will this spark something that says it just doesn't matter where you are? It's kind of what we talked about with Adrian actually the other week. Is this a jumping off point to allow you to run virtual services, and do you even want to do that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think there'll be a bit of both off the back of this. I think some advisors will take this as an opportunity to do more virtual stuff and deal with people from all over. I don't have any plans to do that. I like, I'm quite happy dealing with local people, and I quite like meeting them face to face in an office environment with a cup of coffee. So assuming we can get back to doing that at some point, then I intend to continue doing that. I think, the Zoom calls and things, I think that'll replace some other things, and it might just be, the quick kind of catch-up type thing. It might, to me, I can see it replacing some phone conversations with people where you can actually physically see them and they can see you, as well as, I also think there is still a place for having a phone call with somebody because you don't have all the complications of technology and sound being out of
we had that yesterday, didn't we? Yeah.
Lift the phone, have a chat, and it can also be much quicker. You don't need to schedule it and book it. So I think there's a place for all these things still going forward. But yeah, I do think, to answer the question, I think some firms will take it as an opportunity to deal more nationally. I at the moment don't have any plans to do that.
Cool. Andy Arthur. Hey, Andy, how you doing? Right. Do we think I guess it's about the cost of advice, right? RDR is positive for firms, but not all the bad apples are gone, and this is an FSCS fee thing. We've got a couple of questions on this. Do you think that the RDR has disenfranchised lower value clients as a horrible? I know it's a shorthand, but my goodness, it's difficult to find a good way of speaking about clients. Their value shouldn't just be tied into what their assets are, but we know what you mean. And getting advice out to people who maybe aren't asset rich, but would massively benefit from what it is that you do and what so many other planners do. How do we do that?
Yeah, great
do you think RDR did create that advice gap, basically? And could you fix the advice gap in the next 3 minutes, please?
Yeah, and the FSCS levy, I see, I've also fixed that.
I was coming on to that.
In the chat.
Yeah. With time we have left,
I do think it played a part, and I do think it played a part in the advice gap, in that advisors started a fee charging structure that didn't necessarily rely on the sale of a product anymore, and so yes, it did knock people out of the advice market. So yeah, there is a big, we know there's a big problem there, and that's a difficult problem to fix. I think there are firms, and I know I'm involved in the. I'm not sure why, because of my age, but I'm involved in the next gen community as well. But there are a lot of younger advisors.
Yeah, it's stretchy.
Yeah, there are. Apparently, it's a state of mind rather than an age thing. So
is that right?
I'm running with that. But yeah, there are a lot of younger advisors in that, who are then looking to deal with similar aged people, and they have developed some charges and modeling, fee charging structures. It might be a smaller monthly retainer type thing where they know there's maybe no assets, and so they have propositions around that. And so yeah, I think that there are ways of doing it, but yeah, to kind of answer the original question, I do think it probably did help make the advice gap a harder issue to deal with. It's a big, that in itself is a huge subject and a complicated one and a difficult one to resolve.
It really is.
A bit like the FSCS levy question.
I noticed you haven't I noticed you didn't solve that.
No, I think you said we're out of time, did you not?
I would definitely getting towards that. I mean, I think, for what it's worth, you can't be an engine of social policy, right? You would be getting paid government grants and that kind of stuff if you were there to implement social policy, in terms of debt management and those kind of things. And there's a reason that money advice and various other things are in there. So you're kind of here to run a business, and I guess that's what you're doing. And I wonder then, you don't even need to comment on this if you don't want, but if the market wants to take care of it, the market will take care of it. Whatever we think about a capitalist system or whatever, that's what we've got, and that's what's meant to happen. Is if there's something to do and it's worth doing, then the market will take care of it. But it just hasn't done it yet. But we're, if we zoom out, we're a very short way along this timeline of what so many people are working towards for this part of the profession. Listen, I think we are sort of out of time. There are a couple of things we didn't manage to get to. Pat from Parmenion, thank you for your question. We didn't quite get into that, so we might pick that up in another session. It's about the valuation of businesses and that kind of stuff, which is maybe something we don't quite have time to dig into today. But thank you so much for doing all that. It's brilliant to hear, not just because you had your position in the PFS, but just being a planner. And my favourite ones of these are other than John Rowland, of course, and anyone else that's still on the chat. But my favourite ones are...
There are people still in the chat, are there?
There are, yeah, quite a lot of them actually. As a percentage of who's in there, you did very well, Garry. You did very well. I know you care about these things. I love hearing from the planning firms themselves. They're always my favourite ones. So thank you very, very much for doing it. Very much appreciated. Next week we have another planner. We have Catherine Knowles from Cura, who's going to be great. I think Steve's going to do that one. Get a proper professional back in the seat, which will be the main thing. Until then, that's it from us. Thank you so much for being with us. Do please come back and see us again next week. Thank you again to Garry, and Landcat out.